Even the porch swing I paid to rebuild. And then they texted me, "Hey, the mortgage is due, can you cover it again?" If you've ever been the one who held everything together while everyone else lived like the house was theirs, you need to hear this story. Because what I found in a manila folder buried under their medical bills changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and finally choosing yourself. The ceiling light hummed a tired kind of hum, flickering every so often, like it couldn't quite decide if it wanted to stay alive. Claire Whitmore sat at her parents' dining table, her usual spot, third chair from the left, facing the window that still hadn't been washed since the spring freeze. The table was cluttered, as always, with insurance forms, medical bills, prescriptions half-filled, and envelopes from Medicare that no one else seemed to open unless she was home. It was Thursday afternoon. It was always Thursday. Claire moved with quiet efficiency, sorting bills by due date, highlighting where premiums had jumped, folding the worst of the news neatly so her mother wouldn't cry over dinner. She'd been doing this for years. Not because they asked her to, God forbid they'd ever do that, but because she knew they wouldn't do it otherwise. She reached for a fresh pile when her hand paused over something unfamiliar, a manila folder. Unmarked. Slightly thicker than the others. It was tucked underneath an outdated gas bill and a menu from a barbecue joint that had closed last year. Claire hesitated, fingers grazing its worn edge. Something about it felt heavy. The kind of weight paper shouldn't carry unless it held truth. She opened it. Final Will and Testament. The words stared up at her like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Claire blinked. Her heartbeat didn't quicken. Her hands didn't tremble. But the air shifted. Like the room exhaled something it had been holding in. Her eyes scanned the document quickly, trained from years of reading financial fine print. She didn't mean to invade. It wasn't labeled, wasn't hidden, wasn't even put away. But still, she read. The house, the retirement account, the life insurance policy, the modest savings. All of it to Samantha. Hey Younga Zista. Claire's name appeared once. One sentence. One breath of acknowledgement in a document that decided the future of everything her parents owned. We trust our eldest daughter will understand. That was it. No assets. No instruction. No gratitude. No explanation. Just trust. Claire leaned back in her chair, the edges of the folder still open in front of her. The hum of the ceiling light above filled the space where emotion might have risen. But there was no flare of anger, no sting of betrayal, no bitter taste of injustice. Just silence. Of course they trusted her to understand. That's what they'd always done. She was the one who deferred college housing to stay home longer and help when Dad's back went out. She was the one who paid the overdue property tax without a word, who called the Medicare rep and waited on hold for 47 minutes because her mother got flustered with systems. Claire was the daughter who didn't ask for anything because she had long ago accepted that her value wasn't measured in what she needed, it was in what she could fix. And now, even in this, the final division of love disguised as logistics, they assumed she would understand. Claire closed the folder carefully, as if it were sacred. Not because it was, but because it contained something holy in its cruelty, the final proof that love in her family had always been conditional. And she had always been the condition. She placed the folder back beneath the pile, smoothing over the Medicare envelope, like nothing had happened. The back door creaked open. Her mother entered the kitchen, humming a low tune, the kind she used to sing while stirring chili. the air filled with the scent of cumin and browned meat. Claire stood slowly and walked to the sink. She poured herself a glass of water, needing something to hold on to. Something grounded. She didn't say a word. Not yet. Because how do you confront someone about a betrayal they'll never call betrayal? How do you say? You gave everything to her. And you gave me silence. And expect a response that isn't a sigh or a shrug. She sipped her water and stared out the kitchen window. At the brittle backyard swing she'd paid to have rebuilt last fall. The one the handyman had asked about. Is this your place? She had laughed. No. My parents. I just pay the bills. And now. Even the swing would belong to Samantha. Claire placed the empty glass in the sink and returned to the dining table, slipping her phone into her bag like she might leave. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she sat again, back straight, breath even, and resumed, sorting the paperwork like nothing had shifted. But something had. Not something loud or visible. Not something that could be undone by conversation or guilt. No. What had shifted was quieter. Like a beam settling beneath too much weight. Like a bridge beginning to crack at the foundation, not because of one blow, but because it had been carrying too much for too long without anyone noticing. Claire looked down at the familiar forms and pens and folders she'd handled hundreds of times. Her tools of devotion. Her inheritance of responsibility. And for the first time in years, she wondered not why they gave it all to Samantha, but why she had ever thought they wouldn't. The folder stayed where she'd left it, buried beneath forms and envelopes. Like a truth she wasn't ready to confront out loud. But even as Claire methodically filed the rest of the paperwork, her mind had already slipped out of the room. It traveled back to the living room with the ugly green carpet they never replaced because it still worked, where her 7-year-old self sat cross-legged, reading a story to Samantha, who had once again refused to nap. Claire had already learned by then that being good meant being quiet, being helpful, being easy. Such a little grown-up. Her mother would coo to guests. She's just naturally mature. We never even had to teach her to share. But no one ever asked how it felt to always be the one doing the sharing. The memories came in fragments. Uninvited but vivid Claire at 10. The folding laundry while her sister played in the backyard. Claire at 12. Giving up the last slice of cake because Sammy cried first. Claire at 13. God. That birthday. She had asked. Just once. If they could go out to dinner. Just something small. Her favorite diner. Pie. Maybe. Hamamhasaihu. Rubbing her temple. Honey. Things are tight this month. Can we skip this one? You're so good. I know you'll understand. She had nodded. Of course she did. Because what was the alternative? Be the one who made things harder. 2 weeks later. On Samantha's birthday. There had been balloons. Chocolate cake with cream cheese frosting. An iPad. She needs it for school. Her dad had explained. It's not really a gift. Claire didn't say anything. She just helped cut the cake. She could still feel the plastic handle of the knife in her hand that day, cheap. Slightly sticky. The way the frosting clung to it as she passed slices around the room. Even then, she had known how to disappear in plain sight. As an adult, she perfected it. At 28, Claire had been offered a job in Seattle, 6 figures. A senior title. Ocean views from the office. It would have been a big leap. A life of her own. She'd said no before even discussing it. Her father had just slipped on the ice that January anew, tearing something in his hip. The surgery would be complicated. Recovery slow. Her mother didn't drive highways anymore. So Claire stayed. "We'll never forget this," her mom had whispered tearfully at the hospital. "You're the glue that holds us together." She remembered smiling faintly, thinking how warm those words sounded. Glue. Not daughter. Not Claire. Glue. A substance that held broken things in place until it cracked, dried out, and was scraped away to make room for something prettier. Back in the present, Claire moved to the kitchen for a refill of water. The chili was simmering. The smell thick and nostalgic, almost cruel in its familiarity. She leaned against the counter, staring at the spice rack with the faded labels she'd once reorganized alphabetically. Another invisible act of service. She knew, intellectually, that this wasn't betrayal in the cinematic sense. No shouting matches. No secret mistresses or stolen inheritance. It was quieter. Meaner. In a way, it was the assumption that she would keep showing up. Keep saying yes. That her sacrifices were renewable. That her backbone was an unlimited resource. And she had let them believe that. Worse, she had believed it. 2. She glanced down at her hands. The same hands that had driven them to every doctor's appointment. The ones that had signed checks, typed up financial plans, rewired their internet when they insisted they didn't need help. Strong hands. Steady hands. But tired. So tired. She stepped out to the back porch. The light outside was that late-day gold. The kind that softened edges and made even the weeds look poetic. The swing swayed slightly in the breeze. The same one that had cracked under her dad's weight 2 years ago. She had paid the handyman herself. He'd smiled when she signed the check. "Nice of you," he said. Your folks." She had nodded. "Yeah. I just want them comfortable." It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the full truth either. Comfort had become a currency in her family, a way to buy silence, to delay confrontation. They were comfortable because she wasn't. They were relaxed because she bore the tension. She sat on the swing, feeling it creak beneath her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from her boss. "Quick update on the Simmons account, can we touch base tomorrow?" She didn't answer. Not yet. Claire looked up at the sky, fading into lavender. As a child, she used to believe the sky would listen if she whispered secrets into the wind. She'd told it once that she wanted to be seen. Not just noticed, but truly seen. She had whispered that secret when Samantha had won a school award for a project Claire had basically done for her. And her parents had cheered so loudly. "You're such a good sister," they'd said. "Always helping." She was proud. She was. But also aching. And she hadn't known. Back then. That ache was the first language of invisibility. She ran a hand through her hair and leaned back, letting the swing carry her gently. The phrase echoed again. "We trust our eldest will understand." Understand what? Exactly. That reliability wasn't love. That endurance could be exploited. That being easy to lean on made her easy to leave out. Claire closed her eyes. Maybe she did understand. And maybe that was the problem. The knock on Claire's door was light. Polite, the kind of knock people use when they aren't sure whether they're interrupting something. It was her neighbor, Janet, holding a bowl of strawberries and a kind smile. "Hey. On she said. Just wanted to thank you again for helping me with that Medicare login. You're a lifesaver. Claire smiled faintly. Of course. No trouble. Janet hovered a moment, shifting the bowl from one hip to the other. Are you heading over later? Claire blinked. Over where? Janet looked surprised. To the housewarming your parents' place. Your sister's party. Whole street's been buzzing about it. The invite said 3 o'clock. But you know how these things go. Claire's mouth stayed still, but her chest flickered with something she couldn't name. She glanced at the time. 3:47 p.m. Oh, she said. Right. I must have missed that. Janet didn't seem to catch the strain in her voice. Well, if you go, save me a slice of cake. I've got to drive the grandkids to a movie. She left with a wave and the faint scent of gardenia trailing behind her. Claire stood in the doorway a long moment, bowl of strawberries cooling in her hands. She hadn't been invited. Not a text. Not an email. Not even a group message with passive-aggressive emojis. And yet there it was, a housewarming party. At a house that, legally, belonged to her parents. That had been willed to her sister. That Claire was still paying the mortgage on. She placed the strawberries on the counter. Suddenly not hungry. She should have been angry. Offended. Hurt. But mostly, she just felt misplaced. Like she was standing in someone else's life. Someone else's storyline. At 5:12 p.m. Claire pulled up across the street. She hadn't planned to. She wasn't dressed for it, still in her jeans and faded navy cardigan from sorting files that morning. But something in her needed to see. The driveway was lined with cars. Lawn chairs on the grass. Laughter drifted through the open front door. The kind that came easy and loud when people didn't worry about who was missing. She didn't park close. Just far enough to remain unnoticed. Samantha's hatchback was parked front and center. Trunk open. Balloons tied to the porch railings bounced in the breeze. Pink and silver. Like a gender reveal without a baby. Claire scanned the porch. There it was. The swing. Rebuilt by Claire. Paid for by Claire. Stained by hand over a weekend when she canceled her trip to Galveston because the handyman couldn't make it. And on that swing sat Samantha. Barefoot. Glass of rosé in hand. One leg crossed over the other, like it was her throne. She posed for someone's phone. Then laughed. The flash caught her hair just right. Minutes later, Claire saw the photo pop up on Facebook. Caption: home. Finally. Claire stared at the screen. Thumb hovering. She zoomed in. Saw the potted fern she had picked out from the nursery. The wind chimes she ordered after the last ones broke. The porch lights she rewired herself last winter. Home. Finally. 2 words. And yet they felt like a complete erasure. She didn't cry. Not then. She didn't slam the steering wheel or scroll through old texts looking for validation. Instead, she locked her phone, placed it face down on the passenger seat, and leaned back. The window was rolled down just enough to catch the music, someone playing acoustic covers of Fleetwood Mac on the Bluetooth speaker. She recognized the song. Landslide. She closed her eyes. They had thrown a party inside a house she still paid for. They had posted pictures of joy built on her unseen foundation. And they hadn't thought to tell her. Because people rarely think of the pillar when admiring the paint. They don't thank the beam that holds up the ceiling. They just hang a chandelier and say, "Isn't it beautiful?" Claire drove off 20 minutes later. Not because she was in a hurry, she had nowhere to be, but because she couldn't afford to linger in a life that refused to claim her. Back home, she opened a bottle of water and sat on the edge of her bed. She scrolled again. The comments rolled in beneath the photo. "So happy for you. Sam, you deserve it all. What a gorgeous porch. Your parents must be so proud." Not a single one mentioned Claire. Not that they should have. These were Samantha's friends, not hers. But that was the point, wasn't it? No one even knew there was someone missing. And the worst kind of erasure is the one that no one notices. She powered off her phone and stared at the ceiling. The fan circled slowly, blades whispering something she couldn't quite catch. It felt like standing in a museum of her own life, recognizing the brushstrokes, the palette, the style, and realizing the plaque had someone else's name on it. They didn't steal from her. They just built over her, layer by layer, smile by smile, until she was beneath it all. Unseen, Claire lay back against the pillow, one arm draped over her eyes. And for the first time in years, she didn't want to fix anything. Saturday night. The family dinner unfolded at their usual spot, El Camino's on South Lamar. Not fancy. Not loud. Just reliable. Like Claire. The hostess knew their names. The same server brought the same queso dip without asking. Even the condensation rings on the table seemed familiar. As if the universe insisted on keeping something stable. Claire arrived on time. Samantha was already there, seated between their parents, cradling a glass of iced tea like it was an accessory. She looked radiant in the effortless way people do when they've never had to clean up after the things they break. Claire slid into her seat and offered a polite smile. She didn't plan on saying anything, not really. She'd told herself this was just dinner, just a routine. But then her father asked about her week. And her mother complimented Samantha's new earrings. And the guacamole was saltier than usual. And something inside Claire broke not with drama, but with decision. So, during a lull in conversation, she set down her fork, folded her napkin, and said, simply, "I saw the will." The air changed. Not suddenly, but perceptibly. Like a dropped glass in a room where no one wants to admit they heard it shatter. Samantha's eyes widened, then dropped to her plate. "I didn't know you saw that," she whispered. I didn't even ask for the house." Her voice trembled just enough to elicit sympathy, but not enough to sound rehearsed. She dabbed her eyes with a napkin in that slow, practiced way Claire had seen before. Their mother reached over, took Samantha's hand. She didn't ask. "Claire, we just thought, after everything she's been through, she needed something solid beneath her." Their father cleared his throat, not meeting Claire's gaze. "Mora Claire." He corrected himself. "She's trying to get her life together. Don't make her feel worse." There it was. The pivot. In less than 3 minutes, the entire table had tilted. And Claire was now on the wrong side of the story. Not the one who had paid 7 years of mortgage. Not the one who took off work to drive them to physical therapy. Not the one who bought the HVAC unit when winter froze their pipes. No. She was now the one making Samantha feel bad. Claire inhaled slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. "I'm not upset that she got the house," she said. "I'm upset that no one thought I deserved a conversation." Her mother gave a tight smile. The kind that masked discomfort with patronizing warmth. It's not about money, sweetheart. It's about the way you process things. Her father added. You've always been a little rigid. Not everything has to be logical. Claire blinked. There it was, gaslighting dressed in familiarity. She wasn't betrayed. She was overreacting. She wasn't hurt. She was inflexible. She wasn't excluded. She just couldn't let go. Samantha sniffled again. I swear I feel horrible. Claire. I didn't even want the house at first. But then Mom said it would make things easier. Claire looked at her. Really looked. Not at the tears. Not at the earrings. But at the posture. The way she leaned into the performance of regret without ever pausing to question the foundation it stood on. You feel horrible, Claire said quietly. That's interesting. Her mother's tone sharpened. Claire. Don't turn this into. Claire stood up. Not abruptly. Not for attention. She just stood. For the first time in her life. She stood when everyone expected her to sit still and understand. She placed her napkin beside her untouched plate and looked at each of them. No rage. No bitterness. Just recognition. Enjoy your dinner, she said. And she walked away. Outside. The Austin evening wrapped around her shoulders like a breath she hadn't known she needed. She didn't cry in the parking lot. She didn't text a friend or write a note in her phone. She just stood for a moment. Under the soft hum of a street lamp. Realizing that for once, she wasn't waiting for someone to follow her. They wouldn't. They were still inside. Finishing their enchiladas. Probably already moving the conversation back to gas prices or Samantha's job interview. And that was fine. Because something in her had shifted. Not snapped. Not broken. Just settled. Like a suitcase packed too full for too long. Finally unzipped. Back in her apartment. Claire didn't turn on the lights. She moved by muscle memory. She set her purse down. Took off her shoes. And sat on the floor beside the window. Outside. The city pulsed softly. Neon signs. The rhythm of distant traffic. She thought about what her father had said. You've always been a little rigid. Rigid. What a convenient word for a woman who wouldn't bend any further. Rigid was what they called you when you stopped saying yes. When you stopped being grateful for crumbs. When you dared to notice the imbalance and name it. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. At the top of the screen. She typed, "Let the record show." Not because she needed to defend herself. But because she would no longer participate in the rewrite. The story they were telling, the one where Samantha was fragile and Claire was harsh. Where love was given based on who appeared most broken. That story didn't belong to her anymore. She wasn't going to correct them. She wasn't going to plead her case. She was simply removing herself from the narrative. The night pressed in quietly around Claire's apartment, no phone calls. No notifications. No one checking to see where she'd gone after walking out. She didn't expect them to. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor. The carpet indented where her knees usually landed after long days. This time, there were no files spread out in front of her. No invoices. No folders. Only a shoebox. One she hadn't opened in years. She had stumbled on it while looking for a charger in the back of her closet. It was wedged behind an unused yoga mat and a tote bag filled with reusable grocery sacks. It was covered in dust. Taped on one side. A faded sticky note clinging stubbornly to the lid that read tax stuff. Maybe. She knew it wasn't taxes. It was her archive. Her quiet little museum of things too meaningful to throw out, but too painful to look at. Inside were scraps of her old self birthday cards, high school report cards, a dried rose from prom, even a broken bracelet Samantha had given her when they were kids. And on top, like it had waited patiently for her return, was the envelope. Cream-colored, thin-lined, her name written across the front in her mother's handwriting. Claire traced the letters. Her mother's M was always too tall, too careful, the kind of handwriting that looked like it belonged on sympathy cards. She opened it slowly, unfolding the letter that had once meant everything. I don't know where this family would be without you, Claire. You never complain. You just do. You've always been the one who steps up before we even ask. I hope you know how much that means to us. You are the strongest thread in this home. It was dated 7 years ago, the week Claire had paid $8.400 for emergency roof repairs after a hailstorm punched holes into her parents' ceiling. She remembered the check. She remembered the silence afterward. How no one brought it up again. But the letter came delivered with a pan of lasagna and a soft thank you. She'd cried when she read it then. It had felt like recognition, like proof. But now, as she read it again, sitting alone in the same apartment where she tracked every medical deductible, every copay, every mortgage transaction, they weren't tears that rose. It was nausea. Because that letter wasn't love. It was validation on a leash. Praise offered after she proved her worth. Appreciation. Only when it followed a deposit. Affection. Handed out like a bonus check at the end of fiscal year loyalty. She thought about the woman who had written that letter. And the woman who now texted her like a billing department. Mortgage is higher this month. R. Censure. Can you send it before Friday? No greeting. No punctuation. No acknowledgement that she had found the will. No apology. Not even a placeholder. Hope you're doing okay. Just digits and a deadline. Claire placed the letter down gently and leaned back against the wall. Her apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional creak from the ceiling. She looked at the letter again. It was written by someone who had once seen her. Or maybe just saw her utility. And now, years later, she wasn't even invisible. She was just assumed. She reached for a pen. Not out of rage. Not as some grand symbolic gesture. She simply needed to see it written somewhere other than her own exhausted heart. On the back of the letter, in block, print sharp and deliberate, she wrote, "I'm done." She underlined it once. No exclamation point. No flourish. Just clarity. Claire folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then she slid it into the shoebox. Beneath the broken bracelet and the birthday cards with names signed in pink ink. Not to erase it, but to store it where it belonged in the past. She sat still for a long time. Her back pressed against the wall. Legs numb from the weight of stillness. She wasn't angry. Not in the volcanic, loud, plate-smashing way that people expected from someone who had been used. She was simply finished. She used to believe, truly believe that quiet effort would eventually be seen. That if she worked hard enough, sacrificed often enough, bent far enough, then someday someone would say, "You matter." Not just your labor. You. But what she learned instead was this. Consistency doesn't always breed appreciation. Sometimes. It just breeds expectation. And when you keep showing up without asking for anything in return, people stop seeing you as generous. They start seeing you as obligated. That night, Claire didn't cook dinner. She didn't answer the follow-up email from her boss. She turned off her phone, lit a single candle in the corner, and sat in its low light with nothing but the hum of her own breathing. Not because she was being dramatic, but because she was remembering how to be a person, not just a provider. She thought about all the things she used to do without question: wiring money, fixing the Wi-Fi, researching Medicare plans, staying nearby, staying available, staying useful, and how all of it had been mistaken for love. Or worse, used instead of love. The next morning, Claire opened her laptop. The shoebox remained closed. But on her desktop, she created a new folder. Its title: Evidence of Absence. Not to build a case. Not to get revenge. Just to remind herself of the quiet truth that she had been there. That she had tried. That she had carried it all. And when they rewrote the story to make her absence seem selfish, she would remember she didn't leave out of anger. She left because being useful isn't the same as being loved. And she was done confusing the two. Claire sat at her kitchen table, the morning sun filtering through blinds that hadn't been dusted in weeks. Her coffee had gone cold. Untouched, she stared at the screen of her laptop, the cursor blinking beside the scheduled mortgage autopay. Tomorrow marked the due date, just like it had for the last 83 months. The number sat in the box like a ritual: $2. Censure. A number she knew better than her own rent. Her thumb hovered over the toggle. And then, with a steady breath, she clicked. Cancel. No fireworks. No error messages. Just a quiet system update: payment cancelled. Next action: none. For the first time in 7 years, Claire would not be paying the mortgage on a home she didn't live in. She didn't expect applause. She only wanted silence, the kind that came from no longer financing someone else's comfort at the expense of her own. The silence didn't last. That afternoon, her phone buzzed. An email from her mother. Subject: updated medical budget. Please review. Claire's stomach tensed, not from the request itself, but from the attachment. She opened the PDF. Every cell. Every color-coded line. Every formula hers. The same spreadsheet she had spent 4 nights building when her father's co-pays had doubled. Same headers. Same assumptions. Same font. Except now, at the bottom, the footer read, "Prepared by Samantha Rivers." Claire didn't blink. She didn't rage. She didn't forward the file to a friend for validation. She just sat there, absorbing the theft, the repackaging of her effort, her brain, and her precision wrapped in Samantha's name, like a gift bag sealed with entitlement. A minute passed. Then, too, Claire opened a blank email. No shaky hands. No second guessing. Just a calm, surgical kind of resolve. She addressed it to her mother and father. CC'd Samantha. BCC'd her accountant just in case. Subject line: This is not a threat. This is a boundary. She wrote. Attached is the original version of the spreadsheet sent earlier today, created, saved, and timestamped 6 months ago, under my credentials. Going forward, if any document I have authored is reused or altered without attribution, I will treat it as misrepresentation. I have covered the mortgage, repairs, and hospital copays. I have no further financial obligation to this household. This is not punitive. This is not an argument. This is documentation. Claire. She attached the original spreadsheet, watermarked it with the date, and hit send. The air felt different. Lighter. Not because justice had been served, but because the silence had finally broken. Because that was the real cost all along. Wasn't it silence? Her silence had been mistaken for agreement. Her reliability mistaken for permission. Her effort mistaken for endlessness. When you carry things quietly, people assume they aren't heavy. When you give without complaint, people assume you have nothing to lose. And when you never say no, people stop remembering that you even could. The next morning brought no response. No apology. No clarification. No, we didn't mean to. Just another email. Subject reminder medical deductible. Due Friday. No mention of the previous thread. No reference to her boundary. Claire closed it without reading further. She opened her evidence of absence folder. Created a new subfolder, titled Correspondence. And dragged the thread inside. She didn't do it to keep score. She did it so that when they rewrote the story, she would have something to remind herself. No. This happened. I didn't imagine it. A week passed. Then 2. The mortgage never came up again. Neither did the spreadsheet. But one afternoon, a cream envelope appeared in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a blank check. Unsigned. Unspoken. New note. No apology. No explanation. Just a gesture, if you could even call it that. It said everything they couldn't. We still expect you to fix it. We know we crossed a line, but we'd rather throw money than admit it. You're not part of the decision, but you're expected to pay for the consequences. She didn't tear it up. Didn't cash it either. She slid it into the drawer beside the old letter from her mother and whispered, "You don't get to buy silence anymore." Claire knew this wasn't the end. There would be more asks. More moments of, "We thought you wouldn't mind." More casual erasures. But she had found something she hadn't had in years. A voice. Not loud. Not sharp. But clear. Firm. And hers. The clerk at the notary's office greeted her with a distracted smile and a clipboard. "Are you here for the title release or the financial severance?" Claire blinked. "Both." The woman nodded. Used to clients who didn't explain more than they needed to. The office was tucked between a bakery and a pet supply store in a quiet strip mall north of downtown. A place you'd only visit if you were trying to cut a tie marriage, mortgage, or otherwise. Claire had parked right in front. Left the engine running for a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't nerves. It was ritual. Because when you've spent a lifetime holding things together, letting go can feel like an unnatural posture. She sat in a brown vinyl chair and handed over a stack of documents, copies of bank accounts, insurance policies, the original deed for the house. Her signature still scrawled in the bottom right corner from years ago. The notary flipped through each one, checking boxes, highlighting fields. Claire watched her hands work. Professional and precise. Moving between papers with the ease of someone who's seen this story 100 times. The quiet one. The responsible one. The invisible partner. Walking away because the burden finally outweighed the bond. "Please confirm this line," the clerk said, pointing. Claire read it aloud. Effective immediately. Claire Rivers is released from all legal, financial, and associative obligations related to the shared estate of 2647 Springdale Avenue. Her voice didn't shake. She signed. Initialed. Dated. It took 19 minutes. At the end, the clerk handed her a stamped copy. "That's it," she said. "You're no longer tied to the property." Claire folded the document carefully and slid it into her bag. She didn't smile, but she felt something shift inside her. Not relief. Not sadness. Not even pride. Just freedom. Unfolding slowly, like breath returning to lungs that had forgotten how to expand. On the way home, she made one last stop. Not for nostalgia. Not for drama. She just needed to return a key. The house stood quiet on a late Tuesday afternoon. No balloons this time. No parked cars or music drifting from Bluetooth speakers. The lawn was slightly overgrown. Weeds beginning to flirt with the edges of the porch. Claire parked across the street. She didn't get out right away. She stared at the house that had cost her more than money. The one she had funded, fixed, preserved. The one she had never lived in, yet had shaped with every unseen act. She got out slowly, the key cold in her hand. No one answered the door. She hadn't knocked. That wasn't what this was. She walked up to the mailbox, still the same dented metal box she had once repaired with a coat of silver spray paint, and opened it. She dropped the key inside. No envelope. No notch. No explanation. Just the clink of metal against metal. Done. She turned. Walked back to her car. She didn't glance at the porch swing. Didn't look at the flower bed she used to weed every spring. Didn't check to see if someone watched from the blinds. She simply drove away. At home, she filed the notarized document beside her tax returns. She poured herself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and let the silence settle around her like a blanket that finally fit. There were no messages waiting. No guilt-laced voicemails. No tearful interruptions. Only stillness. And for once, that stillness didn't feel like a punishment. It felt earned. She opened her evidence of absence folder, created a new subfolder titled Legal Release, and dragged in the scanned forms. She didn't read them again. She didn't need to. The point wasn't documentation for others. It was documentation for herself, a breadcrumb trail back to clarity. In case the world ever tried to convince her she'd imagined it. Some exits are explosive. Some are whispered goodbyes on rainy train platforms. But the most permanent ones, they happen in daylight. On Tuesday afternoons. In strip malls with flickering fluorescent lights where the paperwork is stamped. And the key is dropped in silence. Claire didn't need a witness. She was the witness. To her own resilience. To her own release. To her own rewrite. Claire was slicing cucumbers for lunch when her phone buzzed with a notification from a news app she barely remembered subscribing to. Local daughter. Steps up during family crisis. She held us together. Parents. Say. She stared at the headline. Cucumbers still in hand. Knife hovering midair. Her breath caught. Not in surprise, but in recognition. She clicked. There it was. A glowing profile piece in the Hill Country Gazette, complete with a photo of Samantha on the front porch. Arms wrapped around their parents. Standing beside the very swing Claire had paid to rebuild. She's our rock. Her mother was quoted. She moved back when things got tough. And she's made the house feel like home again. Claire didn't scroll immediately. She just stood there. cucumber juice dripping onto the cutting board. Watching the story unravel in front of her like a badly written movie based on someone else's life. The article was generous. It painted Samantha as selfless, resilient, family-oriented. It detailed how she had left a promising career in marketing to return home and care for their aging parents, how she'd restructured the family's finances, and how her gentle leadership kept everything from falling apart. There were quotes from neighbors, people Claire hadn't seen in years. "She's just so grounded." One said, "You can tell she really cares." The irony was a punchline that didn't even try to hide. Claire, who had funded the swing. Claire, who had wired the money for the roof. Claire, whose spreadsheet Samantha had plagiarized. But none of that was in the story. Not even her name. Claire didn't feel rage. She laughed once. But not because it was funny. It was a quiet, disbelieving exhale, the kind that follows a moment of such audacity. Your body can't decide if it should cry or applaud. She sat down slowly, set her phone on the table, and stared out the window for a full minute. Then she got up, walked to her laptop, and opened a folder she hadn't touched in days. Evidence of absence. Inside were subfolders: mortgage, repairs, medical, correspondence. Each one organized with the kind of detail only someone who had lived the truth could provide. She clicked into mortgage, pulled up PDFs of every monthly transaction, bank statements, wire confirmations, timestamps. She opened medical, clicked through prescription reimbursements, scanned receipts, copies of coverage documents, thank her notes on copay adjustments. She wasn't building a case. She wasn't filing a complaint. She was telling the truth. For herself. Because the real erasure wasn't just that Samantha had taken credit. It was that no one had noticed Claire was gone. They hadn't just replaced her. They'd rewritten her. She opened a new email. To family attorney CC, her accountant. And her own personal inbox. Subject: estate discrepancy, documentation. Attached. No greeting. No small talk. Just the body. Attached is a record of financial contributions I have made to the Rivers household between 2016 and 2024. This includes but is not limited to mortgage payments, home repairs, medical support, and administrative management. While I have legally severed financial responsibility, I am preserving this documentation for record keeping. No action is required at this time. Claire Rivers. She attached 3 folders. Payments. Repairs. Uncredited documents. At the last minute, she added a 4th press versus reality inside it. A screenshot of the article beside a time-stamped bank statement for that same week's mortgage payment. She hit send. She didn't send it out of pettiness. She didn't want headlines corrected or egos bruised. She just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside of her own memory. Because when no one else holds the record, the burden becomes part of your spine. And she was tired of carrying it alone. The rest of the day passed unremarkably. No calls, no emails, no follow-ups. And she was glad. She didn't want an apology. She didn't need her name added retroactively to someone else's fairy tale. She only needed to know that if the story ever came into question, her side wouldn't disappear with her silence. That night, she walked to her balcony with a glass of water and a thin cardigan wrapped around her shoulders. The city below pulsed like always, cars rolling past crosswalks. Laughter from the bar across the street. Dogs barking in distant courtyards. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. From Samantha text. Feeling petty now, Claire didn't reply. She didn't even open the thread. She placed the phone face down on the railing and whispered to the wind. If truth makes me petty, then I'll own the crown. The breeze answered with nothing but stillness. And it was enough. 3 months had passed. Enough time for the grass to grow too tall around the fence. Enough time for emails to stop coming from people who once asked for everything and thanked for nothing. And enough time for the cucumbers in Claire's backyard to grow crooked. She didn't mind. The first time she'd noticed one curling sideways. She'd reached instinctively for the gardening book. Fingers flipping to the section on correcting unruly vines. Then she stopped. She looked at the twisted stem. The uneven green skin. The little scratch marks from the garden netting. It was beautiful. In the way only something untrained and unpressured can be. So she let it grow. The garden became her new ritual. Every morning at 6 a.m. Claire stepped outside barefoot into the dewy grass. Her coffee still steaming in one hand. The other brushing through tomato leaves and basil sprigs. Her knees were always dirty now. And the tan on her shoulders had deepened into something permanent. And most days, she didn't speak to anyone until afternoon. Claire had moved into the little rental house 2 counties over. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. A kitchen too small for dinner parties. But she didn't throw dinner parties anymore. And she didn't miss them. She taught twice a week now at a local women's center just off Main Street. Her class was called Money After Marriage, but really, it was for any woman who had once believed stability meant staying silent. There was Linda, recently widowed after 32 years. Marisol, whose ex-husband had made her sign every tax return without explanation. Jade, 31, who said she'd never paid a single bill on her own until last month. They came with shame. And left with folders. Organized ones. Claire taught them how to calculate net worth. How to read a mortgage statement. How to open their own accounts. How to say, that's not my responsibility anymore. She never told them her story. But she brought her whole truth into the room. And somehow, they could feel it. One Saturday afternoon, after she finished weeding the tomato rows and washing soil from under her nails, Claire opened the mailbox and found a single envelope. Cream-colored. No return address. She didn't have to turn it over to know who it was from. The handwriting was deliberate. Looped M's. Careful spacing. Her mother's. Without question. She didn't open it on the porch. She made tea first. Chamomile. With honey. She sat down at the kitchen table, the one she'd refinished herself. Sanding it for hours until the old stain came off and the wood finally breathed again. She opened the envelope slowly. Like peeling back a layer of time. Inside was a single page. Written in a hand that had once signed permission slips and birthday cards. It said, I should have protected you. 2. I saw what you carried and mistook your quiet for indifference. You were never invisible. Claire. I just didn't look hard enough. No apology. But also no excuses. Just truth. Late. But true. Claire read it twice. Then a third time. Not because she was uncertain, but because the words made her feel something she hadn't let herself feel in months. Not vindication. Not anger. Not longing. Just seen. Not by the world. Not by Samantha. But by the one person she had stopped hoping would look. She rose from the table and walked to the corner drawer of the bookshelf where she kept her unspoken archive. She opened it carefully. Inside were 2 letters. One from 7 years ago, where her mother had called her the strongest thread. The second, written in Claire's own hand on the back of that first letter, I'm done. Now, a third joined them. She placed it between the 2. Gently. Like laying something to rest. Not because she needed to relive the past, but because she refused to erase any version of herself, the girl who kept quiet. The woman who kept receipts. The human being who, for once, had chosen herself. That night, the sky was velvet and star-scattered. Claire sat on her small porch with a blanket over her legs and a cracked ceramic mug in hand. There was no porch swing. No chime in the doorway. Just a string of warm lights she'd hung herself. A thrift store chair with a squeaky back. And the sound of the neighbor's wind chime tapping gently against the dusk. Her phone buzzed once. She didn't look. She didn't need to. Because the peace she'd found wasn't fragile. It didn't require isolation. It only required truth and the absence of pretending. She turned to the garden. Rows slightly crooked. Herbs a little overgrown. But thriving. All on their own. And as the breeze moved through the fence vines, she whispered not to the stars. Not to her mother. Not to Samantha, but to herself. I wasn't the one who left. I was the one who stopped holding the roof up. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real freedom sounds like. Not a slammed door. Not a scream. But a quiet pause. A crooked garden. A breath you don't have to hold anymore. Sometimes letting go isn't failure. It isn't abandonment. It's simply the moment you stop pouring water into someone else's well and start tending your own. And if you've ever been the one who carried everything, if you've ever believed love meant earning it with effort, if you've ever walked away and still wondered if you were the problem, this story is yours. 2. You're not invisible. You're not petty. You're not dramatic. You're just free. And freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes it grows crooked and beautiful in the soil you chose for yourself. Stay with us. More stories are coming. More truth. More endings that